Bird shit.
Bird shit.
Bird poo. Bird droppings.
Bird crap.
Chicken shit.
Albert Einstein may or may not have said that the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. Even if he didn't say it, it's a notion that has stayed with us in various forms for a long time. But maybe we could turn the idea around to say that it is a sign of sanity to be able to change one's mind.
You learn things as a small kid, you know, this is how to draw a cat. This is how to, so towers was one of the other things, and towers always looked like that, and like that, and like that. Okay, the top of the tower, and then the tower goes down. And I'd now come to Ireland, started secondary school, and then moved to Newtown School, and suddenly discovered that I was supposed to be quite good at art. And that gave me a huge confidence, and I thought, I'm good at art. And I was drawing things, including towers, and my art teacher came quietly and said, you know, you just got that perspective wrong on the tower. And for the first time I thought our teacher was brilliant. I thought, I think he might have got it wrong. So we sat and we looked up at the corner of the building, and to my absolute horror I realized that it was going up and not down as I had drawn. And it was this incredible embarrassment of how had I never questioned it? Why was I just drawing it the same way? And feeling that my cutis in the class had rapidly sunk from near the top in art to absolute bottom. And then he lifted me out of that by just coming and saying, Karin, it's right now. You're actually observing the evidence and transferring that to the page.
We're talking in this set of statements from researchers of various kinds about changing their minds and why they change their minds. Science and other forms of research need to be open-minded. They need to be open to the possibility of being wrong or having taken on ideas or conjectures or theories that require revision.
A very inspirational teacher, Sister Kathleen, introduced us to science, and she told us one day that, more or less the first day, that matter was made of atoms, and that an atom had electrons, had a nucleus with protons and neutrons and electrons going around it, and that almost all of the atom was space, that the particles were tiny. And I was sitting there at the desk, looking at this wooden desk with my hands on it, and I thought, this is not actually real at all. This is nearly all space. And it was like a bolt out of the blue. It really was a revelation to me. And I was looking at the wood and thinking, this is actually made of something that's nearly all space, but it feels like wood to me. And that, after that, I was just hooked on science. After that, I realized that reality is not what it seems. It's just not. And so you've got to really look behind everything. You've got to question everything. You've got to look at the evidence for what you think you're looking at in front of you, and balance it up and really think like that. And so from then on, I was a scientist.
So when I first heard of the idea of using mRNA as a vaccine, I said to myself, that'll just never work. And what I said, so mRNA is nucleic acid, and we have two kinds. We have DNA, which codes for our genes, and then in order to get DNA into protein, you have what's called a messenger in the middle, mRNA. Okay, and I had been spending a long time trying to isolate different types of message. We talk about message, and it's really tricky because it's very short-lived. So that's the first thing, is it's very fragile, so it breaks up terribly easily. And then the second thing that I knew at the time when I first heard this idea was mRNA, when it is around in your body, it stimulates an inflammatory response. And so if you injected it in, I was imagining, it would trigger off a whole response that you wouldn't want. So here were these two problems that I thought to myself, that'll never work. Well, was I ever completely wrong? So when the COVID vaccine got rolled out and everybody said it's the mRNA, it's going to be the new thing, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, is that really right? Then I read and discovered what she had achieved, what the pair of them had achieved. And it's the most wonderful example of really meticulous science applied to a problem in order to solve it. It's just the most wonderful story.
What do you put in a toaster? Well, I suppose it depends on what your fancy is.
Bread
Bread.
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 or bagel
Bread.
Bread.
or muffin
A bagel.
Barnbrack.
or ciabatta.
Pop-Tarts.
Yeah, I was always maybe unconsciously or subconsciously interested in communication. I mean, when I was younger here in Wexford, I was involved in the Arts Centre. I used to do poetry readings and drama and stuff like that. So I had that side of things, which wasn't a lot. I mean, the apex of my dramatic career was the Gort One-Act Drama Festival, so it wasn't the Abbey Theatre or anything. When I was forecasting through the 90s in particular, so many, one of the very, definite predictions about climate change was that nights in the winter would get milder. And I was seeing this, and it was just seeing that we weren't getting snow, we weren't getting ice, we were getting very mild winters. And not only was I experiencing it, but like month by month, Met Éireann do statistics, they put out, the statistics for the previous month, and then they would have been based on the 1960 to 1990, 30-year period. That would have been the baseline. And every month they were just warmer than the baseline. I said, well, something is happening here. This is not just some figment of our imagination. So that was really when climate change began to become more than just a theory in my mind. No, we're actually looking at this, we're living through something here that's changing. And unfortunately, it's continued to change. We haven't really stopped that juggernaut.
Galileo had that experience when he was making observations that tended to support the idea that the Earth went round the sun. The papacy was very unhappy about this. He was hauled in. He was threatened in various ways. He changed his mind for the purpose of the record, as it were. And then 359 years later, the papacy apologized to Galileo, so that even an institution like the church was capable of acknowledging that evidence stacked up in such a way that their view had to be changed.
There's the story of this lady, and her cells were used for research without getting her consent and without the understanding the need to keep her family informed. And it led to a whole 50 years of anger and uncertainty, and that from that both the institutions that were involved with this whole matter realised that it was essential to give public information. The cultures to where the cells were put, they were just being developed, and it was a very simple time, and that from the honesty behind the research at the time, grew the need to have structures and protocols and guidelines to inform not only the scientific research itself, but how you handle tissue and how you work with the participants who are volunteering to be the donors.
I had to change not only my sort of journalism, but the tone of that journalism to convey what is really happening, but also to ensure that I was backed by the scientific indications. I've had many conversions, and in terms of changing my thinking, and that's because of my science background, which is great. It's a great fallback point and a great guide. But I think overall, looking back in the last 20 years, I would have to say the biggest change in my thinking has come driven by science and driven by climate science is in my attitude to climate change. And it's really jumping from the view that climate change is happening and somehow it's not going to affect us, and it's might happen in 100 years' time. We might suffer a little here in Ireland, but we'd probably be okay. To coming to the view that this is a climate crisis that is happening here and now. It's as the recent UN IPCC report showed, it's happening in every corner of the world. No place is safe, and that's true of Ireland as well. And I think that prompted a change in my thinking in underlining the need for urgency and this idea that we can make incremental changes to our society and our economy and we'd be fine. That's not the case anymore.
We're talking about chicken shit, okay? Manure, what's a technical term, chicken litter, okay? So we have all of these intensive, a few million head of poultry around the state, and they produce a chicken litter. So the bedding of these intensive houses has a lot of manure, and it's a difficult, awkward material. And historically, it would have been kind of taken out and spread on land, but it's difficult to manage in its raw state. It's also, it has pathogens in it, and it's smelly and difficult, and it was always considered a waste because the primary product is obviously either the chicken or the egg, and not this material. So in law, and environmental law is quite complex, but there are places where it's very definitive, and that's in around the waste area. So this was a waste, and it had to be managed very carefully. So a character came to us, and that was fine. The science was all behind that. There's a high risk. A character came to us and said, I have an invention. I have a furnace, a boiler, that will take this chicken litter as a fuel and generate heat from it. And you might find it odd science, but I put a bag of this chicken litter, on the desks of people who were the decision makers. All the nutrients that are in chicken litter, the phosphorus, for instance, is preserved in the ash. So the ash now is free of any biological agents, and it's rich in lime and rich in phosphorus. So it's actually a very good fertilizer in itself that's really easy to handle. So we gathered all the science from all of these various tests and looked at the whole kind of narrative arc from something was once upon a time considered a waste, and we were creating a case to deliver it to now designate it as a raw material, what we call a secondary resource. And that allowed the law to be changed, because the law wasn't for changing up to that point unless the science behind it was robust enough that this could be, for the four principal things that the laws or that science set out to achieve. Is it safe to use? We proved that it was safe to use, and is it equivalent to alternative? In fact, it was slightly cleaner. It is cleaner than burning coal, and it was cleaner than burning heavy oil from an emissions profile. So it was cleaner than equivalent fuels that they'd have no issue buying and using. And is it, from a human health point of view, is it safe to use and handle? Yes. So this is what science brought about, a kind of a major change from something that was once upon a time a waste is now considered a resource.
Full name is Sean Marshall. My background is I've studied science at different periods of my life. Whenever anyone asks me what type of science, I always say I'm a chemist, but I don't work in a pharmacy. I was thinking about how we speak about COVID and the coronavirus has changed in 18, 19 months. There was a meme going around about how it had been caused by bat soup. And the meme was a bowl of soup with a bat on top of it, right? Now, I'm not saying that bat soup is not a thing. It probably is. It may be delicious, but I'm pretty sure they don't serve it with a bat on top of it instead of a bread roll. We're talking now about staycations and lockdowns and stuff like that, and what everybody was doing during lockdowns. Whether it be banana bread lockdown jigsaws, or my particular favourite, spying on your neighbours. Because I'm colourblind and I don't eat carbs. So that's basically the only one that was left open to me. And then that doesn't become funny anymore, you know what I mean? And it's kind of moved away from that now. I mean, I did an open air gig in August of this year. So that was an actual gig with actual people there, not online at all. And it was open air at the time, obviously. And everyone was trying to steer clear of the COVID material, you know what I mean? And move on to getting back to just, you know, having a normal routine, a normal comedy routine, which is difficult because if you're an observational comedian, you're talking about things that have happened. And if nothing has happened for 18 months, that's a very quiet gig or a very short gig.
In politics, and perhaps in the media following politics, it's often treated as a matter of dishonour to change one's mind. And relatively minor deviations get turned into dramatic U-turns in order to ridicule them sometimes. It's rare that somebody in politics openly says, I have changed my mind and here is why.
My original hypothesis was that there were inherited genes contributing to performance traits in thoroughbreds. What makes one horse run faster than another? It's obviously its genes, right? That's what I thought. So I studied that for years, and we made a discovery actually that that we now refer to as the speed gene. We discovered that a particular gene that's involved in muscle development, differences in the DNA code of that muscle gene can be used to predict whether a horse is likely to be a sprint race performer, sprinter, or a longer distance horse. So horses that race are quite similar to humans. You have sprinters and then you have marathon runners. While the inherited DNA does contribute to the chance of a horse, you know, being good or bad or indifferent, there are other factors. Okay. So this is the sort of the point at which I had to scratch my head and say, well, you know, what else is going on? And what we think, and this is the new hypothesis, is that there is I suppose it's been known that there's a considerable involvement from the environment. But how does the environment shape how you end up? Well, there's a new field called of epigenetics, how non-genetic factors influence the expression or the activation of the inherited genome, the inherited DNA.
Oxygen.
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 Oxygen. Oxygen.
Oxygen.
Oxygen.
Oxygen.
Oxygen. I had a very expensive education, which has been really, there's been no use to me at all, except in pub quizzes. And I've had a successful career in pub quizzes.
So we're part of a scheme, me and my farming neighbours were to try to destroy the bracken up on our hill, the hill behind our house, Knock Row. And so I was up there a few weeks ago knocking down the bracken with my scythe, which I own. It's the best tool for doing that. No mechanical things will work. And I fell to talking with my neighbour, one of the farmers, as we were working side by side, and he was saying, what about these dockens? You're a scientist. What can you do about the dockens? I'll have to poison the dockens. I said, oh no, please don't put 2,4-D on the dockens because it'll destroy the clover as well. He said, yes, I understand that. The clover is good, the dockens are bad, so I don't know what I'll do. I don't know what I'll do at all. In the middle of this book, she said, there's a crew over in Cumbria in England who are taking fleece and bracken and somehow composting it to make a friable loam that can be used as a potting compost. And I thought, brilliant. That's the future for us as bone poor upland farmers, is we'll set up a little factory here, and instead of just ignoring the bracken because it's too much hassle to cut down, we'll actually go out and we'll pick every last bit of bracken and we'll put it into a vat. I don't know how it's going to work, but we'll put it into a vat with sheep fleece. The science of that, the changing mind of that, is the fact that up on the hill I was primed to think about docks by a random conversation I was having with somebody and saying, how can we repurpose docks? And I thought about that, and then the next day it was like my mind was receptive to this other random fact which came over in my audiobook.
When my children were little and they were always asking why this, and why, that's the most amazing thing, because you've always got to question. You question yourself, question your own answers, question your own results, and no, never stop asking questions.